and we're live at the Ohio Union on the campus of Ohio State University. And joining us here is Daniel Takaji, who is a senior fellow and a professor at the School of Law here at Ohio State. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And Jim Heath, who has roots here in Ohio. He is the moderator of Capitol Square, WBNS TV, Channel 10 here in.
Morning.
As you look at this part of the state, the president is going to be here tomorrow. Mitt Romney has been in Ohio 13 times, the president 16 times. A must-win for both states, and this is a must-win part of the state.
Yeah, I mean, we often refer to Central Ohio as the swingiest part of the swing state. You have the Democratic Northeast, which is Cuyahoga County and Cleveland, and then from there, Steve, you have Cincinnati, Hamilton County, which is primarily Republican. Central Ohio, usually, typically, traditionally up for grabs. Columbus is Democratic, but the surrounding counties in Central Ohio are very, very Republican. So the candidate that can win here, this is sort of the middle of the seesaw, will usually tip the election. As far as these presidential candidates go, as you well know, and as many of the viewers know, no Republican in history has ever won 270 electoral votes without winning Ohio's 18 this year. And no Democrat has done it since John F. Kennedy back in 1960. So it's a pivotal state. The Obama camp very much wants to win it because they believe if they win Ohio, they win re-election. Romney knows, and his campaign knows, he has to have it as part of his 270 electoral vote coalition.
The president here on this campus tomorrow, he's been going to a lot of college campuses over the last couple of weeks. George Mason just last Friday in Northern Virginia. He was in Wisconsin just after his first debate appearance. How much enthusiasm is there among the students here at Ohio State and among college campuses across Ohio?
Well, it was pretty strong. He was in Ohio last week at Bowling Green and then Kent, and he had large turnouts there. We expect tomorrow's rally here at the Ohio State probably to be maybe top 30,000. We saw that in Madison, Wisconsin with the president on Friday. That will be certainly a huge rally. But I must emphasize, Steve, in all reality, I've been doing stories all throughout the summer, the enthusiasm level for the president among younger voters, while they still prefer him, in other words, Mitt Romney hasn't picked up young people's support, the enthusiasm for going to the polls is significantly less. That excitement level is down from where it was 4 years ago. I know that the Obama campaign is worried about it. As you look at Ohio, he won it with 52% of the vote in the best of Democratic circumstances 4 years ago. And a major part of that coalition was college campuses like the Ohio State. So they know they've got to get a shot of energy back in there, and that's why we see him in Ohio on college campuses. And tomorrow's rally, as I said, expected to be pretty big.
Daniel Takaji, you're a native of California. You're now living here in Ohio, so you're seeing this from a couple of different vantage points. California is not even in the mix except for the president there just yesterday and today raising money. What's it like for you as somebody who's been here now for about 9 or 10 years?
Well, as somebody who studies election law, it's great to be in a state where you actually see presidential candidates campaigning, right? And because of our electoral college system, that's not true for, in fact, most of the country nowadays, right? It is a small number of states that gets virtually all of the attention, and we are either the beneficiaries or the victims of that, depending on your perspective, right? You can't turn on the TV here in Ohio without seeing a campaign ad, including many presidential ads, and you can barely walk across the street here across from the Ohio Union without being hit by somebody's motorcade.
Well, let me ask you about the ads. Jim Heath, just this morning on your station, Channel 10, at about 5:30 in the morning, there was a 6-minute commercial break. And in that 6 minutes, 6 different political ads running between a minute to 30 seconds. And my question is, at what point is there a law of diminishing returns when you're hit by ads, not only for the presidential race, but from super PACs and also a pretty contested Senate race here in this state?
Well, I think it's one of those things where if you have the money, if your campaign has the money, you can't go quiet, you can't go silent. If the other campaign is running ads. So I think that you'd be at a disadvantage there if you go dark and they're running ads. But I think more importantly, to answer your question, Steve, we now have early voting going on in Ohio. The vote in Ohio is today. It's this week. And so these candidates are doing everything they can. They've even restructured, to some degree, some of their current ads where they're actually talking to the camera. They're talking to Ohioans, both Mitt Romney and the president, talking directly to the camera, making their appeal, knowing that there are folks who are going to head to the polls and actually vote today. So, I think Dan is right. This is just one of those states, probably one of 5 in the country, where just commercial after commercial, the candidates have a heavy presence. But again, this is key to their strategy to reach 270 electoral votes. They both need it.
Early voting coming after just one debate. There are 2 more scheduled on the presidential race, 1 vice presidential debate. Is it a good idea to have early voting when this race could still change either for the president or for Mitt Romney?
I think personally that it is a good idea to have early voting, that it is important to provide that level of convenience for voters. The jury's still out on whether and to what extent early voting increases turnout, but what we've seen across the country in recent decades, and especially in recent years, is a sharp uptick in the number of voters who are voting before Election Day. Voters like the convenience of early voting, and I think, in-person early voting as opposed to mail-in ballots has certain advantages. We know, for example, that a lot of mail-in ballots don't get counted for one reason or another because voters make mistakes. Not a huge number, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 2%, whereas with in-person early voting, you avoid those problems. Now, one might argue that you should limit early voting to a shorter period of time, for example, the 2 weeks before Election Day, but I don't think there's any question that there are big advantages to having some early voting, including taking pressure off the polls on Election Day.
Jim Heath.
Yeah, I just want to briefly add, Ohio is looking very closely today. We should have a decision from our Secretary of State, John Husted, who's a Republican. He has been adamantly opposed to the weekend before the election voting. It was actually a state legislature, Republican legislature, that said that they were going to cut that off the Friday before the Tuesday election. That went to court. The Obama campaign sued. 2 courts now have sided with them. And Husted is expected to hold a press conference today to make a decision of whether he's going to continue to appeal it or whether he will open up voting. That hits huge ramifications because the demographic, Steve, of the likely voter the weekend before the election heavily favors Democrats.
And there was a decision from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals just on Friday of last week, which, as was just mentioned, came out in favor of the Obama campaign's position that for the 3 days before the election, civilian voters have to be treated the same as military voters and offered the same opportunity for early voting.
Good morning from Columbus, Ohio, and as you learn very quickly when you come to this campus, it is the Ohio State University, so no corrections, the Ohio State University. There are about 60,000+ students in the Ohio State University campus, including its satellite campuses. We're inside the Ohio Union. Our phone lines are open, and 202-585-3883 is our line set aside for those of you who live in the state of Ohio. The president traveling here tomorrow. Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan also crisscrossing this state in advance of the 18 electoral votes that are up for grabs to get to 270, and our 2 guests with us. Jim Heath, let me go back to issue 2, and I want to get your response as well, because this is a big ballot initiative here in Ohio. What is it?
Issue 2 has to do with redistricting. This is a swing state within the state, Steve. In 2006, Democrats swept every statewide office with the exception of one, the state auditor's position. 4 years later, Republicans sweep every single statewide office. That was in 2010. Just so happened their sweep coincided with the census, which triggers reapportionment redistricting. And Republicans did what the majority party typically and traditionally has done when given the pen to redraw maps. And they drew legislative districts and congressional ones that favor Republicans. We have about a 50-50 state, actually more registered Democrats in Ohio than Republicans, and yet when you look at our legislative map and our congressional map, it is way out of whack. There are a lot more Republicans. So issue 2 addresses that. It creates a bipartisan or nonpartisan commission. Dan can speak to this a lot better, but it creates a nonpartisan commission that would basically draw these legislative lines. We've seen it work in other states, Arizona and other states. It is heavily opposed by the state Republican Party. They are gunning for it. They've already run TV ads. They don't like it. And there's a big question mark of whether there's enough funding on Dan's side, on the issue 2 side, to get out the word, or whether this will go down at the weight of the Republican Party.
And you helped write this.
I'm a co-author of issue 2 and part of the campaign committee for issue 2, which would create an independent citizen commission to redraw our district lines. It's amazing, even though we're a 50-50 state, there are almost no individual state legislative or congressional districts that are truly competitive. Around 3/4 of the congressional districts are drawn to favor the party that's currently in power, and almost 2/3 of the state legislative districts. So, for practical purposes here in Ohio, even though our presidential elections and U.S. Senate elections are very competitive, our legislative elections by and large or not, and that's what issue 2 is going to try to change. And it's exactly right. The partisan politicians in the State House downtown really don't like issue 2 because they would actually have to be in competitive districts and therefore be accountable to the people, which is why the politicians are opposed to issue 2. We think, and we being the League of Women Voters and my other co-authors of the initiative, that it's essential that Ohioans vote for issue 2 to restore the power back to the people.
But they claim that this gives an independent panel a blank check to write these congressional districts, and they're saying it's taking it out of the control of elected officials and putting it in the hands of this advisory board. How do you respond to that?
Well, that allegation, the blank check allegation, has already been proven wrong. You don't have to take just my word for it. The Ohio Supreme Court, which has 6 Republicans and 1 Democrat, by the way, has found that allegation to be false. Listen, the politicians who control things right now are desperate to hold on to their own power, and they've told one lie after another in an effort to keep that power. The reality is that this commission would be a lot more transparent and therefore accountable to the people than the process we saw last year, where maps were drawn. You can't make this stuff up. Maps were actually drawn in a secret hotel room, which is referred to in their own email as the bunkers, presumably so nobody could see who was going in and out.
Our guest here at Ohio State University, Daniel Takaji, who is a professor of law at OSU, and Jim Heath, who is the political editor and reporter for WBNS-TV, and you host a show Sunday mornings titled
Capitol Square.
Let's get to your phone call. Steve is joining us, Dayton, Ohio. Good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Please go ahead.
The reason I was calling, I'd seen some of the ads that we've been running here in our area, and I'm really put off with some of the negativity that we've been seeing. But there was one in particular that, me being an independent, very libertarian, I didn't like the way the health care thing went on, so I'm leaning more toward Romney. But there was one ad that the president was running about the auto industry and how they saved GM, and there's 800,000 jobs in Ohio, auto-related. But it doesn't really mention that Honda is the largest manufacturer in the state of Ohio. No bailout money. Ohio and Ford both hire more people than Chrysler and GM combined. And I just think it's kind of deceitful when they try to say that the bailout money saved these other countries or these other companies. So.
Steve, thanks for the call. We'll get a response. You're nodding your head.
Well, I don't have any particular response to that, but you do see a lot of claims made in ads, some of which are more true than the other, and I can't speak to the specifics of that one because I haven't seen it.
But in terms of the economy here in Ohio, the unemployment rate across the state is about 7%. The national average is, now 7.8%. In other parts of the country, Detroit, it's above 10%, and yet that seems to be a solid Democratic state. Ohio still seems to be a swing state between the D's and the R's right now.
Yeah, it's been a very troubling narrative for the Romney campaign. I remember covering him early this year in places like Lorain and shut down manufacturing plants where Romney wanted to build this narrative that the Midwest was struggling and that he could help it out much better than the president. Problem is we do have a very aggressive, ambitious Republican governor, John Kasich. The unemployment rate now, at that time, a full point below the national average, and Kasich was painting the narrative basically that it's morning again in Ohio, that jobs are being created, that companies are coming back. So very quickly after Super Tuesday, the Romney camp had to kind of reevaluate, and they changed their strategy. No longer were we covering Governor Romney and shut down factories, but they came on board the Romney campaign, and we've seen little discussion about some of the worst conditions in the state. So it's been a troubling narrative, if you will, and kind of a challenging one for the Romney camp to try to get on board. Is the economy in Ohio bad? Obama to blame? Or is the economy good? Can we keep it on Kasich and not give credit to the president?
And I do think it's important to remember here in Ohio, people associate the American auto industry with Detroit, but much of northern Ohio is dependent upon the success of the auto industry, which is why I think Governor Romney's statement or his op-ed about letting Detroit go bankrupt has had ramifications for Ohio as well.
And you see that when you come into the airport yesterday, all the Honda signs, which has a big presence here in the central part of the state. Let's go to Mark joining us from Bryan, Ohio. our line for Democrats. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. Good morning. Nice to get through. I wanted to talk to you guys, first of all, about one thing, the environment, and something that was said in the debate last week. First of all, the president had the lead on energy, and he said that we were drilling now more than ever for gas and oil, and he's right. And then Mr. Romney came back with the rebuttal saying, Mr. President, your figures are right. We are drilling more for gas and oil now than we have in a while. And then he said, but it's not due to your policies. And then he went on to say that because we are not drilling on federal land. And that was an opening. Why the president didn't jump on it, I don't know. But anyway, all the president would have had to say is, Mr. Romney, do you think the American public would condone drilling in Yellowstone? Mr. Romney, do you think the American public would condone drilling in Yosemite? Because I just got back from fly fishing in Montana, and I was on federal land for 5 weeks, fishing every day. I fished 33 days in a row, and I was on federal land where nothing is going on, and I enjoy that. I don't want to be fly fishing next to an oil well or fracking wood that's stored. It's poisonous. So, like I said, I think I just don't understand. Mr. Romney should be drilling like crazy federal land, and that just goes to show how he is uneducated about the circle of life in natural environment. So that's all I.
Mark, thanks for the call. Jim Heath, do you want to respond?
Well, I'll tell you, coal and fracking are issues in this campaign. That the Romney campaign has tried to cultivate those votes that gotten into a bit of trouble here and there on the coal issue. But fracking is something that the state of Ohio has proceeded on. And they've opened up state lands to do that. The state believes they're sitting on a potential gold mine with the Marcellus Shale and Utica Shale right in the northeast corner of the state. And so it's proceeding here in the state of Ohio, and Romney's tried to tap into that. Interestingly enough, environmental issues, not very big on the other side. Haven't heard the president speak too much about it as far as opposing coal, natural gas, and fracking in particular.
And yet, gas prices in your home state of California now approaching $5 to $6 a gallon, coming a month before the election. Here in Ohio, it's about $3.70, so far below what we're seeing in other parts of the state. Does that impact voter turnout and voter enthusiasm or lack thereof? Jim Heath?
Well, I think that it would have. I remember the president came to talk about energy. He actually came to the Ohio State earlier in the year to talk about energy, and at that time, gas prices here were about to hit that $4 mark, and the narrative at the time was the president wanted to get in front of the spin because, as we all know, incumbents in a bad economy plus high gas prices usually have a very difficult time of winning re-election. Since then, gas prices have stabilized and they've dropped somewhat. The most fascinating part of this entire election process, I think, in trying to look at the narrative of this quote-unquote bad economy, is the fact that we have an inflationless bad economy. And I think that has gone a long way to help Democrats try to hold the line, if you will, because, as we all know, with a bad dose of inflation, all of us feel it. You go into the grocery store, you try to buy milk and bread, and the costs are very, very high. Typically in these bad economies with this high unemployment, you see higher inflation, and all of us are in a funk. That has certainly not been the case in this election cycle with inflation next to nothing.
I want to go back to our initial conversation. This is a map of the state of Ohio, and as you can see, Columbus in the central part of the state. The red area is Cincinnati, Hamilton County, which is strong Republican. The northeastern part of the state, Cuyahoga County, Cleveland, strong Democratic. And then as you look in these two areas, the pinkish area, what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me, what's interesting, there are 88 counties in the state of Ohio. I would say probably 70 of them typically are red. Mm-hmm. Your urban areas, your big cities are blue. And particularly in that northeast corridor there, Cleveland and Akron, those are heavily Democratic areas in that corner of the state. But the rural parts, the smaller counties, are part of that Republican coalition. When you look usually at a statewide map and election results, you'll see mostly red. But the key blue areas, that's where Democrats, obviously, the population centers are, and that's where the votes are at.
So turnout for Election Day and also early voting, what are you looking at?
Oh, I think the battle to get out the base for Democrats in these relatively few urban areas like Columbus, Toledo, Akron, Cleveland, Dayton, Republicans getting out their base in rural and so-called ex-urban areas, this is going to be critical. Just as important, if not more important, than appealing to the median voter. And in this respect, you know, this is why everybody looks to Ohio every 4 years. We're in some ways a microcosm for the rest of the country, not in all respects, but in this respect where the battle over turnout is going to be huge, and that is precisely why the Obama campaign has been fighting so hard to preserve early voting the last 3 days before the election, because they view this as a critical way of getting their base out, and I think they think they're in a better position to do that for early voting than are the Republicans. But we'll see about that.
We'll put it in perspective of, I mean, Ohio has the longest streak now of getting it right, of voting for the winner. George W. Bush won re-election in 2004 with Ohio's electoral votes. He carried it with 51% of the vote. President Obama carried Ohio 4 years ago with 52% of the vote. The one key that we'll be looking at in the state on election night is Hamilton County. The president actually carried Hamilton County, which is unusual for a Democrat to do. He carried that key critical county 4 years ago. Republicans are very confident that he is not going to carry it again this year. And the Romney camp internally, they believe that his numbers in those key areas of the state that you showed, he's outperforming John McCain by a wide margin.
And in fact, the New York Times reports that since 1948, only Lyndon Johnson, George McGovern, and John Kerry outperformed in Ohio compared to where they performed nationally.
Yeah. Well, and that goes to show, it's and sort of what Dan alluded to. The demographics here, the mix of rural and urban, white and black, male, female, all of it is sort of a microcosm within the Buckeye State. And I think that's why it turns out to be such a good bellwether and a good barometer of where the country is at year after year, beside the fact that we still have the 7th largest chunk of electoral votes, which the Republicans in particular look toward putting in the bank towards their 270.
But a quick follow-up on that point to you. Pennsylvania, Michigan, even if you head south to West Virginia that border Ohio. What makes this state so different? Because Michigan and Pennsylvania in particular seem to be solid Democratic states, or lean Democratic. West Virginia is likely to be a solid Republican state for Mitt Romney. What is it about this state that differs from its neighbors?
So we've got a mix, right? We've got parts of the state that are quite like West Virginia, right? That are Appalachian, where Obama is, at least most of those areas, not likely to do very well. We've got parts of this state that are like, let's say, Pittsburgh, right? That are sort of more, such as northeastern Ohio, which are traditionally, you know, steel and auto manufacturing related areas. And then we've got parts of the state that are quite like the South, right? Rural areas which tend to vote heavily Republican. So it is precisely this, in some respects, unique mix of having several large urban areas and a lot of rural areas, Appalachian areas, that makes us, you know, right at the tipping point almost always in presidential elections.
We welcome our listeners on C-SPAN Radio, heard coast to coast on XM Channel 119. We're coming to you live from the Ohio State University, the Ohio Union in Columbus, Ohio. Daniel Takagi is a professor of law here at OSU. Jim Heath with the WBNS, the CBS affiliate, Channel 10. And our next call is Tony, joining us from Conway, South Carolina. Good morning to you.
Yes, good morning, and I hope you don't cut me off, but I want to say something. I generally vote Republican. But I have voted for Kennedy, and if I like the person, I vote for him. But I like Romney, but I'm going to vote for Obama because I want to see the Democrats get what they deserve. I'll tell you, the black people are voting for Obama because he's black, and that's fine, okay. And they think he's going to be good to them, okay, that's fine too. But they talk about Romney lying. Gosh almighty. Obama stands before the servicemen, and he tells them that his father served in World War II. Both his fathers were born in 1935 and 1936. That would make him 5 and 6 years old, and nobody jumps on him. The media doesn't jump on him. But when Quayle said something about putting an E on tomato, it became viral. This guy lies all the time. His birth certificate's a lie. That'll come up years after he's out of office. And let me tell you something. Why are we going to the UN all the time to get this one world thing? I want the Democrats to get one world. I want the Democrats to find out why Obama ordered 400 tons of hollow point 40 caliber bullets for his special army. Read Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and you'll see that this guy is paralleling everything that Hitler did. Special army, taking over.
Tony, I'm going to jump in. Thanks for the call. I do want to clear up one point. The president has never really talked about his father. He has talked about his grandfather, who did serve in World War II, and his speech is available on our website at cspan.org. I'm not sure he's really going to vote for Barack Obama, but any reaction to his comments?
Well, I think it goes to show the continued, maybe Dan would agree with this, the continued polarization in this country that we thought might go away upon Barack Obama's election. Remember, this country was heavily divided during the George W. Bush years. That partisanship still exists today, both sides, and I think Ohio is an example of where that get out the vote that we were talking about is going to be an interesting barometer for both sides of where it's at. In 2010, Republicans swept every statewide office, as I mentioned, here in the state. Less than 12 months ago, we had a ballot referendum on SB 5, Senate Bill 5, highly controversial, where Governor Kasich had basically limited unions' right to collectively bargain. The state went to vote on that. 61% of Ohioans voted to repeal it, just a year after Republicans swept every statewide office. So, I mean, this state swings, and it swings quickly, but that partisanship, I think Dan's right. I think ultimately this is going to be a ground game of who can get out the vote. Independents are disenfranchised, a lot less enthused about the president this time around. Will they show up at the polls and side with him is the big what if.
And I think it's, it's absolutely true that we've seen intensifying polarization, not just among people in Washington, but across the country in recent years. And the point that I would add is it is making it increasingly difficult to govern because the incentive, and redistricting, which we discussed earlier, is a part of this. The incentive among people in Congress, is, whether it's a Republican president or a Democratic president, is to oppose virtually everything that the president of the opposite party wants to do. And our system depends on cooperation and compromise, which is why you've got a lot of people across the political spectrum very frustrated by the way that things are working or not working in Washington.
Compromise a dirty word now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
We'll next go to Mark. It's almost like you could have a triangle between Ohio, Virginia, and Florida, which are the three key battleground states. Mark is in Ocala, Florida. Good morning to you. Welcome to the Washington Journal. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Dan and Jim, for all your work. And Steve, it seems like whenever I call in C-SPAN, you're hosting the show. And at age 18 to age 30, I was a United States Marine. I also guarded United States embassies as a Marine, which had its own demands, and I did well at that. I'm actually a unionized worker here in the United States. I gave the non-union world a side. A chance, and I got the hell beat out of me, and I got my dignity back about 15 years ago by joining organized labor. My father was in the union, and I had moved south, Steve, to Florida from the Midwest, and I built probably about a half of what's an area called the Villages, practically with my bare hands, and with one of the biggest contractors just outside of Ocala, where many retirees from Ohio and Michigan and Illinois and in New York all move, and it's a neat little area, but I had nothing to show for myself, and I barely had any money to pay my bills, and then I joined the Carpenters Union in Gainesville and got immediately my self-respect back and my dignity, and I'm calling the show for the Ohio listeners to understand that what this, and Jim, the reporter, just touched on it, what we're talking about here is standard of living for people who work for a living, whether they're bus drivers or cafeteria workers or nurses, and now even doctors or even reporters or professors, that we need to, as Americans, put our collective John F. Kennedy family back together again. And nothing against poor Mitt Romney. He's done well. But if you look at the roots of Bain Capital, we may want to check into its connections to Central America and making money off of what happened with the Cold War, El Salvador people. But in any case, there's a connection there with Bain Capital and Central America, and I would just ask the people of Ohio to realize that the heart of the Republican Party today cares not for my native Illinois Abraham Lincoln, nor do they care for General Sherman and General Grant. They're actually still still Confederates. And those poor people in the coal mines of southern Ohio and West Virginia make really no more than about $14 an hour, which we carpenters in the union, we do a little bit better than that. So most of the coal miners are not union. So stand up for yourselves, workers. And we're not asking for nothing we don't deserve. We just want to make a living so we can look at our children with a little self-respect. And I appreciate both men and yourself, Steve.
Mark, thanks for the call. Let me pick up on 2 points. First of all, the average salary for an auto worker here in the state of Ohio, what is it? Do you have an estimate, Jim Heath?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
The Wall Street Journal this morning reporting that because of the 2010 law that organized labor can now come out and campaign openly and go door to door and hand out leaflets. Does that have a huge impact in the ground game here for the Democrats?
Well, I think it does, and this is a state that still has a lot of union households and a lot of people who are loyal to their unions in contrast to a lot of the country. And Jim mentioned SB 5, the law that would have stripped public sector workers of many of their collective bargaining rights. This was a law that was passed by the Republican legislature, signed by the Republican governor in 2011, and then repealed by a citizen referendum last year. And this is, I think, sort of increased the partisan polarization around these issues and gotten a lot of union households in Ohio upset with our Republican governor and maybe the party generally as well.
Our next call is Marie, also from Dayton, Ohio. Good morning to you.
Good morning. I already voted for Obama because Romney is all over the place. One day he says one thing, the following day he says something else. I cannot trust this man at all. I can't believe that people could trust him with the business that he had, investing, destroying companies, putting people out of work. In Chicago right now, there is a county, Freeport, Illinois. People are on strike because the company Honeywell and called Sensata 10 years ago, and the company, the people had to train Chinese, and the company is going to close, I think, in February, and people begged Romney to go there, and he didn't go there. So I don't see how people could vote for Romney. It's incredible.
Marie, thanks for the call from Dayton, Ohio, another early voter.
Yeah, early vote. Obviously, Democrats are counting. Michelle Obama actually was in the state last week in Cincinnati, the first day of early voting. She had 6,800 supporters there. She ended her speech by saying, I want you all to follow the staff across the street over to the Hamilton County Board of Elections office and vote now. I mean, this is critical for both sides to try to get as many of these votes in the bank as possible. Just one quick note on the SB 5 vote and what's fascinating about the state of Ohio. One other nugget here. 61% of Ohioans, that means Republicans and independents, Democrats and independents voted to repeal SB 5. 68% of Ohioans voted to send a message to repeal Obamacare, which was basically Republicans and independents. Independents are critical. They kind of judge these things the best they can. If they want to send a message, they will, but on the same ballot within the same election cycle, they're sending a message to President Obama and federal health care while they're also telling Governor John Kasich, the Republican in the state, that he went too far on collective bargaining.
A couple of polls before the debate had the president up 8, 9, 10 percentage points. Did you believe them?
Never. Look, Bush won in 2004 with 51%. Obama won in the best of democratic circumstances 4 years. One could argue the best of democratic circumstances 4 years ago with 52%. No Ohioan on either side, no strategist will privately tell you they think this is going to be anything more than a 51, possibly 52% verdict, a 4-point spread. So those polls were way out of whack. Ohioans didn't believe that.
What was wrong with the polling?
I don't know. It's still early. And I think that when you poll before debates, when you poll before independents in Ohio begin to make definitive conclusions, is the economy so bad I'm going to go with the challenger, is the president the better alternative? It's just awfully early for a swing state like this to be polling 30, 35 days out. Dan, I don't know if you agree or not, but I just think that we're going to know, and Ohio is going to tighten, and this is going to be close when we hit that final week before the election.
I want to share with you and our audience a couple of the campaign commercials that are on the air right now, because this is really follows up on many of what the viewers have been commenting on. This first spot is titled Dishonesty by the Obama campaign.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
This was dishonest.
I'm not in favor of a $5 trillion tax cut.
Romney's being dishonest here, too.
According to an independent, nonpartisan study, Barack Obama and the liberals will raise taxes on the middle class.
The chairman of that so-called independent group is from Romney's former company. Dick Cheney's on its board. Newt Gingrich was there, too. It's not independent. It's just not true.
As you look at those spots, what's your reaction?
Well, every single day, the campaigns are releasing ads like that. They almost fit the topic of the day. If the other candidate has made what they view as an error, they'll be on the air in Ohio within 24 hours, kind of exploiting that error. I think that this goes back to earlier we were talking about the impact they have. Does an individual ad like that, does it have an impact? Probably not, but there is a overall message, Steve, that I think particularly independents, the critical part of the coalition in this state, they begin to form opinions about candidates. And I think the Obama campaign advertised really heavily on Ohio television throughout the summer, and they were quite successful, frankly, in getting out ahead of Mitt Romney in this state and defining him. Keep in mind, Rob Portman could have been on the ticket. He wasn't. Instead, he went with the gentleman from Wisconsin. They made the announcement over in Virginia instead of Ohio. While all of that was happening, President Obama was spending very heavily here in Ohio to define Mitt Romney, and I think some of that stuck.
So, I think that's exactly right. And, the Obama campaign strategy has been to paint Mitt Romney in ads that it's been running for months now as an out-of-touch rich guy, right? Now, we've seen tightening in the polls, as was mentioned a few moments ago, in the last few days here in Ohio as throughout the country in the wake of Mitt Romney's very strong debate performance. And I think what we're now seeing with this ad you just showed is the Obama campaign strategy, which is to paint Mitt Romney now as, you can't trust him. And this bears a resemblance, it seems to me, to what we saw 8 years ago when, of course, the election came down to Ohio, and the Bush campaign, then the incumbent president, was very successful in painting John Kerry, the challenger, as a flip-flopper. You can't really trust what he's saying. And it seems to me we're seeing a similar message from the Obama campaign now with ads like that one.
It's just amazing. I mean, there are so many eerie similarities between 2004 and 2008, but it's George W. Bush and Barack Obama, who you would typically never think you could ever put together in any kind of comparison, and yet the campaigns in the state are awfully similar.
We'll show one of the Romney campaign spots in just a moment. Marie is on the phone joining us from Cleveland, Ohio, just to the north of us. Good morning.
Yes, I've been in Cleveland all my life, and I heard your guest talking about Hamilton County. Yes, Hamilton County is a heavy Republican state, but there are a lot of Democrats in Hamilton County also. I do know about Cohogee County because I'm part of Cohogee County. I do believe that President Obama will take Ohio. I do believe that a lot of it has to do with the auto industry and the people that supply the parts of that industry, along with the fact that no one trusts Romney in this state. He has flip-flopped on everything and lied and everything else. And when he said the auto bailout should go bankrupt, I think that did it. And I do believe that Barack Obama do have a heavy campaign in Ohio, and I do believe that he's going to win this state. And as far as the polls go, they may be off a little bit, but I don't think they're off that much. I really do believe that that he has came to Cleveland and proved that he do care about the middle class and the poor in this state. And I think that's going to make a difference November.
Thank you very much for calling from Cleveland. Let me go back to what she was talking about and something that you alluded to, Jim Heath, the early advertising that really kind of set the stage for this campaign. The Obama campaign clearly spending a lot more June, July, and August. When the books are written about 2012, what would that tell you about the strategy by the Obama campaign compared to the Romney campaign that says it's saving its resources for now, the final push?
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, as we look back, Mitt Romney struggled here in the primary. He ended up winning Ohio on Super Tuesday with 38% of the vote against Rick Santorum's 37%. And where Santorum really won big are the areas where Romney now really needs to win big, that motivation that we were talking about earlier. So Romney struggled here early on. As he wraps up that nomination, the president then revs up. And as I said, there were some probably strategic moves here that didn't favor Ohio or go Ohio's way throughout the summer. And that early spending, it does define your opposition. And I think, Steve, we might look back and candidates might conclude that they're going to have enough money to do that early advertising. Because if all the advertisements that we're showing now are getting washed in and they all look alike, whoever they're for, then it's the early advertising, I think, that's going to be regarded as working here, and it's going to force all candidates to be on the air a lot earlier.
And here is one of those ads from the Romney campaign, the focus, jobs in Ohio and other key battleground states.
The question Ohio families are asking is who can bring back the jobs? Under President Obama, we've lost over 500,000 manufacturing jobs, and China has passed us in manufacturing. I'll stand up to China. I have a detailed plan to create 12 million new jobs, including producing our own energy in the ground in Ohio. I'm Mitt Romney, and I approve this message because Ohio families can't afford 4 more years like the last 4 years.
Jim Heath, is this resonating?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's effective with independents. Look, independents are looking at this economy. As I said, if there were higher inflation, I think there would almost be a no-brainer regardless of who the incumbent is. But they're looking at that high unemployment rate. They don't like it. They're unsettled about the future plans of Barack Obama. He's had 4 years now. I interviewed a woman the other day who's been unemployed now for 9 or 10 months in the state. She said, the president promised me jobs. She still plans on sticking with him, but she's very disappointed. So that narrative of high unemployment and the economy stuck and what are the plans for the future, I think probably hits and somewhat is effective with independents. Now, whether they trust Mitt Romney in the end, that will be the big what if. The president's campaign's quite confident that they won't.
A final point for both of you. Jim Heath said something earlier that I want to get your reaction to. Rob Portman, who is not on the ticket. If he were on the ticket, would this state be more competitive for Mitt Romney? It is competitive, but would it put this state more in play for him?
Marginally, and I think my general view on vice presidential picks is that they're a fun parlor game, but they don't matter nearly as much as everyone thinks. And, you know,
even here in Ohio.
Even here in Ohio. And the reality is that, you know, Senator Portman, a lot of people in Ohio, including a lot of people who are going to be voting, couldn't pick him out of a lineup. Even though he is our U.S. Senator, he's not terribly high visibility. It might have given him a marginal bump, and if we wind up with a really close election, like in the low thousands, then maybe that would have been enough to swing it, but I really don't think it would have had a big impact.
Jim Heath.
Well, this is where Dan and I disagree. I think it would have had a huge impact. Look, Ohioans haven't had somebody on the ticket, either national ticket, since I believe the 1940s. I don't think that you could have measured the amount of electricity and the jolt of enthusiasm and excitement that you would have put into grassroots Republican activists knowing they had one of their own this close to the White House on the national ticket. He could have locked up Hamilton County. He was the top vote getter in his election. He easily defeated the lieutenant governor in the Senate race, one of the top fundraisers. Obviously, he's been around the block in Washington a few times, so he's well known. I think he would have locked up Hamilton County and that pivotal southwestern corner of the state for the Romney ticket. And I think that enthusiasm of Republican activists would have been much higher, something we couldn't have measured and we'll probably never know. But I personally believe that it probably would have been enough. And my gut intuition is that the Romney camp with Portman on the ticket today would be in Wisconsin, Virginia, and Florida. They wouldn't be worrying about Ohio.
Jim Heath is the moderator of Capitol Square. He is the political reporter with WBNS TV, Channel 10 of the CBS affiliate here in Columbus,
Let's do this
Ohio.
every day. Come back to Ohio every day.
And Daniel Takaji, who is a professor of law, native of California, and spent the last 10 years here at The Ohio State University. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
We are going to continue our conversation on Ohio politics as we come to you, as Jim Heath said, from the swingiest part of the swing state, Columbus, Ohio, which is really the area that will determine how this state votes on Election Day.